I'm 81 years old, and I've been retired long enough to understand something I wish I had understood earlier. Retirement is not what I expected. For most of my life, retirement felt like a distant shore, something far away, something you imagine but never quite reach. It lived in the future, somewhere past the deadlines, past the long weeks, past the years of getting up before the sun. When I was younger, people talked about retirement like it was the reward at the end of the road. You work hard, you stay responsible, you sacrifice now so that later can finally belong to you. I believed that. I believed it for more than 40 years. Back then, my days had a structure that felt permanent. I woke up before 6 almost every morning. The house would still be quiet. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, the same radio station low in the background. My wife would sometimes come into the kitchen in her robe, still half asleep. She'd sit across from me at the table while I looked through the newspaper. We didn't talk much at that hour, but those quiet mornings felt steady, like the world was in its proper place. I drove the same route to work for decades. Same traffic lights, same gas station on the corner, same man who ran the dry cleaners who always nodded when I walked in. Most days were ordinary. Work wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of job anyone writes stories about, but it was stable. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew who needed things from me, and I knew that every 2 weeks a paycheck would arrive. You build your life around that rhythm. Years pass that way. You don't notice them passing exactly. They just move quietly in the background while you focus on the next task, the next bill, the next responsibility. I told myself I was doing the right thing, providing, being dependable, showing up every day. When my children were young, I thought there would always be more time later to take longer trips with them, later to attend more school events, later to sit down and listen to whatever they wanted to talk about. But work had a way of filling every empty corner. There was always another project, another deadline, another reason to say, maybe next time. At the time, those choices didn't feel like mistakes. They felt reasonable. Everyone around me was living the same way. We all told the same story to ourselves. Work hard now. The good part comes later. Later became my favorite word. My wife used to say it to me sometimes. Maybe we should take a week somewhere, she'd say. And I'd answer, when things settle down at work. They never really did. Years rolled forward like pages turning too quickly. The children grew up the way children always do, quietly, steadily, without asking permission from time. One day they were in the back seat of the car asking questions. Then suddenly they were packing boxes for college. You don't notice the distance growing when it happens slowly. Phone calls become shorter. Visits become holidays. Everyone is busy building their own lives. That's normal. That's the way it's supposed to go. At least that's what I believe. Meanwhile, I kept working. 30 years, 35, 40. Somewhere along the way, retirement stopped feeling like a dream and started feeling like a countdown. Coworkers would leave one by one. Someone would bring a cake. There would be speeches, a watch sometimes, a handshake. Then the chair at their desk would sit empty for a while, and eventually someone younger would fill it. I remember the day I walked out of the office for the last time. It was strange. People shook my hand. They told me I deserved it. They told me to enjoy myself. I drove home in the middle of the afternoon, which was something I had almost never done. The sun was bright, traffic was light. When I walked through the front door, the house felt unfamiliar in the quiet. My wife smiled when she saw me. "Well," she said, "you're home now." I remember thinking that this was the beginning of something, the life I had been postponing, the slow mornings, the freedom, the time. For a while it did feel like that. The alarm clock disappeared. I slept later than I had in years. We took walks in the evenings. We drove out of town just to see somewhere different. I started reading again. For the first time in decades, my days were not scheduled by someone else, but something else slowly began to appear in that quiet. Space. More space than I had expected. Work fills a person's life in ways you don't notice until it's gone. It gives your day shape. It gives you somewhere to go. People who expect you to arrive. Without it, the hours stretch. At first, that feels like freedom. Later, it begins to feel like something else. The children had their own lives by then. They lived in different cities, different states, They had jobs and families and responsibilities that looked a lot like the life I used to have. Phone calls became occasional. Visits happened when schedules allowed. No one was doing anything wrong. Life was simply moving forward. My wife and I spent more time together than we had in years. In the beginning, that felt like rediscovering something we had both been too busy to notice. We sat at the kitchen table longer in the mornings. We talked about old stories we hadn't mentioned in decades. Sometimes we drove without a destination. Those were good days. But time has a way of continuing even when life slows down. About 4 years into retirement, my wife got sick. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things: doctor visits, tests, waiting rooms. Eventually, the word cancer entered the conversation. People speak differently when that word appears. Doctors become careful. Family members become quiet. We spent 2 years moving between treatments and long afternoons at home. In those years, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Time is not something you store for later. It's something that disappears while you're busy planning the future. We had imagined retirement together for decades. We had talked about places we would go, longer trips, quiet years. Instead, those years became hospital corridors and calendars filled with appointments. She died on a Wednesday morning. The house was very quiet when I came back home that afternoon. I remember sitting at the kitchen table where we used to drink coffee together before I went to work. The same table, the same chair. But the person who had been part of that routine for more than 50 years was suddenly gone. People visited for a while after that, neighbors, family, friends, but eventually everyone returns to their own lives, and the house settles into a different kind of silence. That's when retirement begins to feel very different. The days are long. You wake up without anywhere you must go. There are no deadlines, no meetings, no coworkers waiting for you. At first, that sounds peaceful. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is simply empty. I walk through the rooms of this house and I see pieces of the life we built: photos on the wall, books we bought years ago, a chair she used to sit in during the evenings. The strange thing about old age is that memory becomes louder than the present. I remember things clearly now that I barely noticed when they were happening. Small moments. My children laughing in the back seat of the car. My wife standing at the kitchen counter late at night. Ordinary days that felt too ordinary to pay attention to. Back then, I believed life was something that would fully begin later, after the work was done, after responsibilities were finished, after retirement finally arrived. But life was happening the entire time, quietly, patiently, and I was often too busy to notice. I'm not saying my life was a failure. It wasn't. We built something real. We raised good children. We paid our bills. We kept our promises. There is dignity in that kind of life, but there is also something else, a quiet understanding that arrives very late. You cannot store time. You cannot save love or presence for a more convenient moment. The people in your life are moving through time at the same speed you are. Children grow. Parents disappear. Partners grow older beside you without announcing that the years are running out. And one day you wake up and realize the future you were waiting for has already passed. Now I sit here at 81 years old. The mornings are slow again. Coffee on the table, the radio playing softly. Sometimes my children call, sometimes they visit. Those are good days. But I can feel time now in a way I never could before, not as a number. More like a quiet narrowing of the road ahead. One day you wake up and realize the future you were waiting for has already passed. No one does. Now I sit here at 81 years old. But I know they are fewer than the mornings are slow again. If you're listening to this and the radio in the middle of your working life, I won't tell you what to do. I'm not qualified to give instructions. Those are every life is different. But I can feel time now in a way I never could before. But I will tell you one thing. I wish someone had said to me when I was younger, narrowing of the road ahead. Later is not guaranteed. I don't know how many years I have left. The time you imagine waiting for you in the future may never arrive. But I know they are fewer than you expect. The people you love are living their lives right now, not in some distant retirement you're planning for. The ordinary evenings, the small conversations, the quiet mornings at the kitchen table, those are not interruptions to life. They are life, and they disappear faster than you think. At 81, I understand something I didn't understand when I was working all those years. Retirement does not give you back the time you missed. It only gives you space to remember it. If this story feels familiar to you in some small way, you can tell me. I still read the messages people send. It helps pass the quiet evenings. For now, the coffee is still warm. The radio is still playing. And tomorrow morning, if I wake up again, I'll sit here and watch the light come through the window, same way I did today.